Have you ever seen a position so dominating that you simply have no good moves? Well, that's ZugZwang. Welcome back to TaraChessAcademy. Today we're going to learn about the idea of ZugZwang, and we're going to start off with this famous position invented by Paul Morphy. ZugZwang means when you have a limited amount of moves, and the moves you can make will worsen your position. So here it's Black's move. After our white rook moves to h6, Black has two legal moves. They could either capture our rook or move their bishop. If they capture our rook, it's checkmate in one move with the pawn. And if they move the bishop any square, it's checkmate again. This time, our pawn is the helper and the rook delivers checkmate. So after we moved our rook to h6, Black had very little moves, and the moves he could make would lead to checkmate. So we could say that Black is in ZugZwang. Here it seems like White is in trouble, because he only has one pawn, but Black has 3 pawns. Plus, the pawn on a2 is super advanced, and it's about to promote after the Black king moves. But White can use the idea of ZugZwang to help him win the game. First, he should make sure that the Black king has no moves, because if we let the Black king move, it's really simple for them. They move their king, and on the next move, they promote, and simple queen and helper checkmate. So we don't want to let the Black king move. That's why we should move our king to c2, because then we're stopping the king from moving to b1 or b2. Now, only the pawn on g6 can move, because the other 2 pawns are blocked. So only this pawn can move. And after we capture it, it's a pawn race. White is planning to promote, and Black is also hoping to promote. But who will win the race? Let's see. Black advances, White, Black, White, Black, and White. But Black also promoted. So how can it be good for White? But because Black's king is trapped, we have checkmate in one move. If we move our queen to g7, it's simply a checkmate. So after the quick pawn race, both sides get a queen, but we can make checkmate on the next move because of the trapped king. So Black was in ZugZwang because he could only make a move with the pawn, and after they go to g5, we can capture it, and after we promote, we make a checkmate. So Black was in ZugZwang. Here, White again seems to be having a problem. White has only one pawn, but Black has 2, and even though the bishops are equal, Black's king is more active than White's king. And if the White king ever moves away, Black can capture the bishop, and with the extra material and his active king, Black will surely win the game. But by using the idea of ZugZwang, White can turn the table by winning the material. So White creates ZugZwang by moving his bishop away, because now look at this. Neither of the Black pawns can move, and if the bishop goes to c8 or e8, white's king will capture it. And if the black king moves away, it's no longer guarding the bishop, and once we capture it, now white has a winning position. White has a pawn, a bishop, and now a more active king. And once he captures the pawn and promotes his f-pawn, white will win the game. In this next position, you may be thinking, how is it possible to create a ZugZwang? There's so many pieces. But if we look carefully at all of white's pieces, we can see that most of them can't move. First, let's look at the king. The king is trapped because he's surrounded by his own pieces. He doesn't have space to breathe. The rook on g2 is pinned because if he moves away, the king would be in check by the queen. And the white queen doesn't have any good moves. If it goes to h3, the pawn will capture and win the queen. But the only piece that can move is the knight on g1. So after black pins the knight, you can see this little box that none of the white pieces can move. The rook is pinned, the queen can't go anywhere, the king can't go anywhere, the knight is also pinned, these pawns are blocked, but there's two of these pawns. So how can it still be a ZugZwang? Well, after white advances their pawn, black can just do a waiting move with his king, and the idea for black is to make these tiny waiting moves so that once white traps all of his pieces, black can win the game. So white had to make a move with the pawn, so he advances it, black makes a waiting move, white has to move this pawn, another waiting move, white has to move again, and then after we capture, white has to advance, we capture again, and now you can see that white doesn't have any moves except losing the queen. So they have to move their queen to h3. They have to give up their queen. That's the only possible thing. So after queen h3, we capture, the rook can't move, and after the king goes to h2, and we capture the rook, queen and helper mate. So you can see, even though there's so many pieces, most of them couldn't move, and the idea was to make all of the pieces not move, and then black would start with his checkmate plan. In this next position, white has a pawn advantage since they have 3 pawns versus 2 black pawns. But let's look at the position more carefully. We can see that black's king is more active and white's king is a bit cornered. Also, the pawns that white has are all blocked, so white can't use any of them. And if our king goes back to h2, black's king can advance further, and slowly but surely, they're going to come and win the pawn on f2. They're going to use some deflection ideas, win the pawn, and then promote their f-pawn. So that's why white shouldn't go back with their king. There's an even better move. If we move our pawn to g4, at first it seems like, why are we doing this? Well, even though black has 2 attackers and white only has one defender. After black captures and we move our king to g3, we can see that black's king now has to move because both of their pawns are blocked and they can't go to f4 or g5 to continue defending the pawn. They have to go away, and after we capture g4, we can soon win f3, and now we have two passed pawns. It shouldn't be hard for white to win. And if black's king moves away, then we can capture this pawn, because instead of going to g5, it's better to go a little bit further away from the black king. Now the black king can't go to g5 because we're controlling that square. So after the king moves, we could promote, but you know what we could also do? We could use another ZugZwang idea. We could move our king to g4, and now the black king has to move away. It can't continue guarding his pawn. He has to move away, and once we capture, it's clear that white will win. Now they have three passed pawns, and white will promote, and that's the end. So you can see that white used the ZugZwang idea to turn a losing position into a winning position. In this next position, we have a problem again. White has two pawns, but black has three pawns. And our two pawns here, even though they're pretty advanced, it's hard for them to promote, because if we advance them and black captures, if we try to promote, the king will stop it, and once we promote, they would capture. So it's hard for us to use that advantage. So we can't use this right away. We have to find a way to stop all of these pawns by using the ZugZwang idea. So first we should move our king to g1, because when we go to g1, we can come back to g2, and then we can meet all of the black pawns. Also, notice how all of these black pawns are connected. They're close to each other, so black is going to try to use that and have their pawns protect each other and see if they can make it and get a touchdown. But since white has the ZugZwang idea, they can simply stop all of black's pawns. First, we should move our king to g1 so that after black moves their pawn, we can meet their pawns by going to g2. And if black moves their pawn to g4, we come back to g1. And you might be thinking, how is this helping us? It's only bringing their pawns further. Well, let's see this position in a few more moves. Black advances their pawn to f3. We block their pawn by going to f2, and black can't advance their g-pawn because then we would capture. If they advance this, we would capture, and we would capture again and stop all of the pawns. So black would advance the other pawn. Now we can stop all of the pawns. The king keeps an eye on everything. If we move our king to g3, the king is attacking f3, h3, and g4. And now one of the pawns has to move. If the pawn either moves to f2 or the other one goes to h2, we would capture it. So we would capture, And then after f2, we stop that pawn. And black wouldn't promote because we would capture, so they would defend their pawn. And here we can't capture this pawn because black promotes and wins the game. So we should block f pawn, and now after the g pawn advances, we can capture either one of them, and the king again stops all of the pawns. Well, one question that you might have here is, why do these pawns keep having to move? Well, it's because if the black king ever moves, then we can advance our pawn to a7, and then black can't stop our pawn. They can't go to b8 or b7 because our pawns are controlling those squares. So after the king moves away and we promote, white will win the game. So that's why black had to keep moving their pawns. And white had to be very smart about how they wanted to stop their pawns. They had to use this idea of ZugZwang, and then they can meet all of the pawns. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please make sure to like, subscribe, and share this video to others. I'll see you in my next video. Bye!